Now, what I suggest you do is this. Have yourself seated with your backs as straight as possible, but not stiff. Now see how you feel. Don't put words on it. Just feel. But if you can't help words running in your head, don't insist.
Hello, everyone. This is Super Dharma Bro Kevin.
Super Dharma Bro Chris.
And welcome to the next episode of the Super Dharma Bros. All right, so we're going to start out our episode today with a little game. This was my idea, so if it turns out really badly, you can blame me on that. And then we're going to have a full-length episode about some misunderstandings of Buddhism, which includes but is not limited to the law of karma, pacifism, and whether you can eat meat or not as a Buddhist. That's a very good one for me to talk about. I got a very strong opinion on that one.
I know.
All right, so we're going to start with a little game called How Well Do You Know Your Co-Host? So I have stacked my questions so that Chris loses, and each of us has a punishment. And we thought that a fitting punishment would be we have to sing a certain song. So if I lose, I got to sing Call Me Maybe for 10 seconds, which is torture because I absolutely despise that song. And Chris, what song do you have to sing if you lose?
I believe for me, you've picked Enter Sandman by Metallica.
That's correct. And Chris then assumes that I'm a metalhead. And I'm like, no, I'm more of an 80s music person. But, every now and again, I go back to my teen years and what I was listening. All right. So, Chris, I'm going to have you go first. So pick a number between 1 and 3.
3.
Oh, whoop, whoop, whoop. This question is actually worth 2 points because there are two acceptable answers. So that was a good pick. All right, so here's the question. If Kevin were not a Buddhist, what would he be? Listen to the choices. Would he be A, agnostic, B, Lutheran, C, Hellenic polytheist, or D, in an existential crisis? Try to say that 10 times fast. So remember, there are 2 acceptable answers for this one, so you could get double the points if you're a good guesser.
I'm going to go with agnostic or in an existential crisis.
Ding, 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 ding. You got both points.
Yes.
So, unfortunately, my plan backfired, and Chris is probably not going to lose this now. All right, so, yes. Chris, I choose 2.
Okay. Who is my favorite author? And you've got 3 choices. Ernest Hemingway, A. B. Kurt Vonnegut, C. Stephen King.
Well, considering how much you like to look at Ernest Hemingway's work in college, I'm going to say it's Ernest Hemingway.
It is, in fact, Ernest Hemingway.
And also an author that I also enjoy reading, mostly because his chapters are short and comprehensible compared to some other authors.
That is true.
All right, so 1 or 2, Chris?
1.
Okay, you're not getting this one.
I don't.
I rarely talk about this to anyone. In 2004, I graduated from high school and moved away from home, almost all the way across the country. Which state did I live in for 3 months in 2004? A, New Mexico, B, Texas, or C, Arizona?
Oh, I don't know why. I know you spent time in Texas, but that wasn't then. I think it's Arizona.
Once again, Kevin's strategy backfires and Chris is correct.
Why do I know that?
So from September until early December, I lived in Phoenix, Arizona. I spent basically all the money that I had with me because I was engaging in the pursuit of sensual pleasures, I guess you might say. And I had to come back home with my tail tucked between my legs and admit defeat. But but I learned
I
a
have,
lot of awesome lessons.
I have so many questions and I don't want answers. I just want the story in my head.
All right, so I have 1 and 3 left. So I'll go with question 1, please.
What instrument do I play? A, the guitar. B, the drums. C, traditional Sicilian accordion.
Let's see here. I'll go with what was A and B again?
A, the guitar. B, drums. C, traditional Sicilian accordion. Do not count that one out.
I'm trying to picture that image in my head, actually.
That would be the least surprising thing ever.
I'm gonna go with. I don't know. I'm gonna go with the guitar.
You are incorrect. I was almost a percussive arts study major. I've been drumming since I was like 4. So.
Well, that makes sense. You have a house, so you probably could find a place for it. I mean, you couldn't find a place in my apartment to put a drum set.
Yeah. And,
that's why I have a harmonica. It doesn't take up hardly any room. But it's harder to play than most people think.
Oh yeah, I'm bad at harmonica.
All right, so this is the last remaining question for you, Chris.
Okay.
When I play Mario Kart games, which character do I most commonly use? A, Mario, B, Yoshi, or C, Toad?
Oh, it's got to be Toad.
Judges?
Oh, who do you use?
Actually, it's Yoshi.
Oh, that was my second choice.
Well, but you followed your first instinct, right?
Yeah, you seemed like a Toad guy. I don't know why.
Because I'm totally into Mushroom Head, All right, so the last one for me, sir.
All right. What is the most niche sport I've done? A, ultra running. B, archery. C, competitive Quidditch.
Oh, gosh. I'm going to go with competitive Quidditch.
I've done all of these sports and do them.
I knew that.
But unfortunately, competitive Quidditch is the answer.
Yeah, I would see the Quidditch group out there practicing, and I'd be like, man, what has this world come to? But I know people do really enjoy it.
You know what's funny is I'm not even that into Harry Potter, and I was on the Quidditch team. Yeah. Now, wait, just so we're clear, I think I won.
So you are correct. You did win. You had, let's see here, 3 points, and I think I only got 1.
I think we should do the song at the end. We'll do it as a bonus content.
I think that's a good idea. No, I got 2 points, right?
You got 2 points, but I still won is the point.
Right. Shouldn't have given that darn bonus. All right, so we're starting out with these misunderstandings of Buddhism, and these are just sort of things that Chris and I have picked up in our experience and that we've read about. So it's not necessarily going to be comprehensive where we cover a lot of things. That's why you can email us or contact us on Facebook. And thank you to those of you who have sent us questions. It really it brightens our day, especially Chris's, because then he's like, "Hey, I can answer a question by email."
Yeah, I've actually gotten some questions from like friends and family via text and message, and yeah, it's been really cool. So we really appreciate that. It's actually been really, all the folks who've asked questions have asked really good questions. So thank you.
Oh, that's good, because I've heard some questions that are less than stellar. But we'll save that for another time. All right, so Chris, the first one is sort of more your area, because this is your verbatim story. So what's the scoop on that?
So the first misunderstanding of Buddhism. This is a thing I heard so much in the community college group we had when people would come to sit with us. And we'd talk about some of the kind of like quote unquote darker sides of Buddhism, or some of the kind of like more like real or heavy kind of things. And people would often say, but like Buddhism is just like being chill, right? And it was this kind of understanding, this kind of like belief that we only deal with like sunshine, puppy dogs, and like Bob Marley songs. Um, and I think people kind of use Buddhism often as this kind of like catch-all for just anything relaxing. I'm listening to a couple of like celebrity podcasts right now for some reason when I'm at work. And like they'll always use like Zen as like the describer for like anything relaxed, anything laid back. Like, oh no, it's just Zen. You got to find your Zen. You know what I mean? So I feel like while our religion kind of has a lot of flexibility and open-mindedness, it doesn't mean that we just like are always like, oh, everything's great, everything's fine, don't worry about it, do whatever you want. Like we actually are kind of an organized, established philosophy, you know? So
Yeah, and to add on to that, the main focus of Buddhist practice is to reduce dukkha. And there's nothing chill about dukkha.
right.
Dukkha hits us from every direction, sometimes really adversely, sometimes not so adversely, and sometimes very subtly where we don't even know it's dukkha. So I feel like, being like, yeah, we're all chill and we just sort of let things happen. I think they're sort of like confusing that with Taoism, the sort of like the way that Taoism
Yeah.
has. And I think you probably agree with that assessment, because sometimes Buddhism and Taoism are sort of put together. They're like, I am Buddhist/Taoist. And I'm like, I'm not the other one, but I am the first one.
There are links between them at certain junctures in Buddhism. But yeah, I often find this comes up when, again, we start talking about heavy things, or we start talking about like cultural issues or engaged Buddhism, or like all these different kind of like places where Buddhism is showing up now. And a lot of people go like, oh, I don't want to talk about these like heavy worldly things. I just want to be chill. And that's not, I mean, again, relaxation and mindfulness is a part of what we do, but it's not the whole thing. So that's my first misconception.
Good point. All right, so point 2 is something also that Chris has more experience with. I don't hear this very often, is that Buddhists are pacifists. So I'll speak a little bit to this in that don't confuse pacifism and the promotion of nonviolence. Obviously, in my practice, I want to practice nonviolence if I can. However, I can see where there are circumstances where you could justify engaging in actions that would be considered violent. If I had a family and I felt that I needed to protect my family, I consider that a justifiable use, because I'm looking out for the well-being of other beings, that being my family. And potentially it could be other beings if I'm able to incapacitate the threat. However, we don't aim for that. It's not something that we actively try to achieve and realize as being violent. So I'm going to let Chris take over, because if I keep talking, I'll get into the area of I don't know what I'm talking about. So Chris, what is your take on this?
So this one's complicated because depending on the denomination or vows you've taken within certain denominations, there can be strong pacifist strains. So in my own denomination, we have a lot of very explicit, like, even if someone is trying to hurt you, you do nothing, so on and so forth. Whether that's metaphor and hyperbole or literal is up for interpretation. Yeah, that being said, though, if you look at the Buddha in his time, he actually was aligned with a lot of kings and figures in power who were strong military leaders. And while he never encouraged anyone to go to war, and he always encouraged them to be peaceful, but he also kind of was like, you're a king, do your job. C'est la vie, He didn't really denounce a lot of those sorts of things. He didn't tell them to dissolve armies. He didn't tell them to get rid of things. And I don't, and that being said, historically, so from an ideological perspective, I think it could be argued that we might be pacifist or should be pacifist depending on our denomination. But again, for lay people, it's not actually explicitly broken down that way. Historically, Buddhism has had issues with war just like any other religion. World War II, Zen Buddhism was used as a vehicle to promote nationalism and war. You see this going on right now in Myanmar. It's with the Rohingya. It's still an issue there. I mean, I imagine wherever Buddhism has been aligned with national powers, it's been used as a call for violence, unfortunately. So I would argue that, yes, we probably should be something like pacifist, but that has not always been the case. And I think we actually need to sit with that very seriously.
All right, good points. So the next point is yours, Chris. Are Buddhists always nice?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. This kind of goes with the whole, like, Buddhism's always chill thing, is that, like, Buddhists and teachers and everyone have to be, like, smiley, bubbly, happy, laid back, blah, blah, blah. Anyone who's spent time with a Zen teacher knows that might not be the case all the time. We're definitely known for being positive and kind of like kind, but we also are allowed and permitted to have very human boundaries. I think it's in and I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong, it's either the Kesi or the Kesi Sutta, where the Buddha is talking about the horse trainer. And the horse trainer talks about, like, if some horses you can be, like, really kind and loving and they learn that way. Sometimes they have to be a little harder with the horse. And if the horse can't learn, they kill it. And the Buddha said, it's kind of like me that way. Like, some people, I can talk about how when you learn all these things, your life will be so good and they'll just learn that way. Other people, I have to tell them about all the bad things that'll happen if they don't live a good life. And then Kessie's like, well, what about the killing thing? And the Buddha goes, well, I kill them, which of course was a metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately, and that's one of those things where the Buddha said a jarring thing to kind of break the thinking and make him think about it. And they talk about it, and the Buddha said, if someone is being completely harmful to our community, to our way of life, being obstinate, intentionally not learning, basically just being a dick. He said, we're going to choose not to associate with that person and not to have them in our community. So clearly he was drawing a boundary. Like, that's not a friendly thing to kick a guy out of a group, but he was very clear, like, hey, we have to have those boundaries. So I think a lot of people mistake bodhisattva's vows and things like that as, like, I have to be this pushover with no boundaries. And that's not true. You are very much allowed to stand up for yourself.
Yeah, and even the Buddha himself, just like in that situation, he even says sometimes if someone's being just a flat out fool, he'll just be like, you are being a flat out fool here, and here's why you're being a flat out fool. I mean, he just doesn't say you're a flat out fool and then walks away. He tries to explain it to the person, and then if the person doesn't get it for some unknown reason, then he does sort of disassociate with that person and say, yeah, I know that person, I'm kind to that person, but I don't associate with that person unless, circumstances pertain to it. And Chris and I were talking about this, being called a fool was like a big deal because when you read the text, it's all about, it's gaining wisdom and knowledge. And then if you're being called a fool, it's basically saying, well, you're not even close to that yet. You're not close to those goals yet. So, yeah, you push her buttons a little bit. You'll have I statements like, I really don't appreciate what you just said or what you just did. And then you may never see us again.
So I'd argue from the Buddhist perspective, like, kindness and niceness is not gauged by, like, cultural mores on how we should, like, interact, but it's gauged on that pursuit of enlightenment. So again, the Buddha was fine with being like, you're being an idiot. But like you pointed out, he doesn't just go, you're an idiot, I'm done talking to you, walk away. There's always the follow-up of like, we need to talk about this thing, So yeah, I mean, I definitely tend to be more of the like, kind of like hippy dippy, like, everyone's got their own thing. But definitely we're able to take a stand on things, both philosophically and interpersonally.
All right, so let's move on to the next one. And I hear this a lot, and I see it on Facebook and Twitter a lot. And it sort of goes like, oh, well, so-and-so hurt me, but karma will get them back. And, karma in general is a misunderstood sort of teaching. And so just to put it, out there is karma is based on intentional action. So unless you can get in that person's mind and understand what their intentions are when they do something, then reserve your judgment for yourself, because it's easy to find fault in others, not so much in ourselves. Sometimes we don't even want to look at our faults, just like I don't want to look at myself in the mirror sometimes. But, karma's workings are much more intricate, and I feel like that this is just like a shortcut version, or to make someone feel better about something they consider bad happened to them. What's your take on that, Chris?
Yeah. I never feel comfortable when people do the whole like, oh, that's just your karma, or like karma happened to you for that, or blah blah. Yeah, it's almost always used in like an interpersonal kind of way. I've often found like no one gets like hit by a bus and they're just like, oh, like that's your karma, which might actually be closer to how like traditional karmic things align. You know what I mean? And the funny thing is, even if they are properly referring to the concept of like cause and effect, like if someone does something bad or unwise, and then they reap the benefits or the bad things of that, that's the phala, that's the fruit. The karma was the cause. So when someone's doing something bad, you're like, that's your karma right there. You are building up that bad thing right now, and it's going to manifest, And I think, that's in general, almost everyone who uses that phrase isn't using it right. And I encourage people just not to use it.
Right. I don't even feel comfortable using that, because if you say, well, this, that, and the other is karma, then it's like, where does that stop? Because then you get into everything is karma. And then it's like, no, that's not, I've read nothing that says that everything that happens to you is based on karma. I think that's more like the Jains believe that, and they still practice Jainism. And so I don't know, it's crossing too many wires for me to be like, oh, well, that's just karma, because the intricate workings are difficult to comprehend.
There are Buddhists and denominations and schools that do view that would argue that everything that happens to you is some manifestation of a past thing. I don't necessarily agree with that either. I would also say that from a practical perspective, most Buddhists don't get in the weeds in it. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, there might be a text that says if you're born missing a hand, it means in a past life, blah, blah, blah. But like, I don't know, no one really talks or thinks about that too much.
All right. So, Chris, how about this mind, man?
Oh, this is a fun one. Buddhism is about emptying your mind, man. Yeah. So, and I might make some Zen people mad with this. I don't know. Some people think that the goal of Buddhism as a whole, or like what enlightenment is a complete emptying of the mind, like no thoughts, nothing, just sitting in like total blissed out stasis. And that any thinking we do is wrong, Oh, you're caught in concepts. Oh, you're caught in thoughts. Oh, you're caught in notions. And I will say that achieving clarity and calmness thing is a part of practice and is a part of focusing in our practice. However, in my own school, Buddhism, we absolutely deny that the point of meditation or Buddhist practice is to just empty the mind, that there's much more to what we're doing. And that's where so meditation might be emptying the mind, but Buddhism is the structure of how we implement that meditation into our life. And that requires thought and insight.
Right. And if that were the situation, there wouldn't be like mindfulness of our thoughts in certain meditation practice. So yeah, I'm not really a big fan of that. And I have a Zen story sort of related to this, where there's this debate about whether a rock actually exists or not when it comes to, oh, does the mind just make up the rock, or does the rock really exist? So there are two Zen students, debating it. And so another Zen practitioner comes over and asks the one that is adamant that it's just created by mind. And that person confirms, yeah, I think that's just in my head, basically. And the other one goes, well, your head must be very heavy because it has a rock in it. So, and if you really think about it, it's a very funny story, because basically using his own sort of perception against him.
Right.
So that's a really interesting and funny story. And that I only remember that because at one point I was studying Zen a little bit. And I don't think emptying the mind is like a layperson's goal. We're going to have concerns, and to be like, well, I'm just trying to empty my mind. We have to address those concerns at that point in time before it spirals out of control. So I would argue that if you're a layperson or you're a spiritual person, it's not necessarily a bad thing that your mind isn't clear.
And I'd argue to kind of complicate this. So in my own denomination, we do have a lot of talk around the kind of like quote unquote primordial mind, kind of the mind without or being without the structure and superstructure of our narratives and all the stories we're telling ourselves and all the thoughts and all that. So there's something that could maybe be akin to this whole like empty mind thing. However, this is the difference, is that to get to that state requires a lot of thinking, thought, and practice and investigation. So we don't just numbly stare at the wall. We're actually kind of working for that state. So, maybe it's a part of it, but I don't think we reach it the way of just no concepts, no thoughts that everyone sometimes thinks we do.
All right, so the next one is something that I brought up in a previous episode, and I thought it was worth restating, that meditation seems to get this sort of like designation that it's like a silver bullet that's going to solve so many of our problems. And what I said previously was it's more like a tool. It's not a silver bullet that's going to solve all our issues, but it's a tool to sort of address those issues. And so, there are people that will say, oh, well, I'll be happier if I become a great meditator. And then when their meditation doesn't go right, they're not happier. They're actually more disgruntled than when they started. And then they stop meditating. And it gets so complicated. And for me personally, and from a Theravada perspective, meditation was not something that lay people were actually actively taught unless they were at a higher spiritual achievement than others. It was mostly focusing on being virtuous, for example, being generous, and working toward a more fortunate rebirth, because as lay people, they had a lot of other concerns that they needed to take care of, like how am I going to feed my family, for example. And so they didn't necessarily have the time to put into a very strict meditation practice to achieve any sort of like higher concentration jhana, for example. And, today it might be a little different because we aren't working 16 hours a day. But I would still argue that if you are going to start a meditation practice, don't make it be like the be-all, end-all of existence, because you're going to have some meditation periods where it's going to be great and you're going to be able to work things out. And then there are going to be other times where, and this happens to me a lot, you get a little bit overwhelmed when you sort of sit down and you start trying to slow things down, and that's okay too. Don't get discouraged with that. But it's not a silver bullet that's going to solve all of our issues, but it can be used as a tool toward the issues that we have.
Yeah, in my own experience, yeah, so Kevin nailed it. Meditation historically often was more of a monastic thing. And really, it's in the West that we kind of start seeing more of the whole meditation is the be all end all, bees knees kind of thing. Meditation for me is just a small part of my overall practice, if you will. Prayer, contemplation, reading, Dharma reading, prostrations and rituals, and meditation are all things we do. And kind of similarly, I think our meditation can help us in other things, but it might not be the thing. So like I went to therapy for a while, and I had a therapist who was a Buddhist as well, and we talked about how like meditation could be integral and a part of the various things in therapy we were doing. However, the meditation was not the thing fixing things. It was the meditation that was giving a space for calmness, clarity, or opposite of that, almost mindfulness of bad things, to then be like, okay, now let's go sit down and actually talk these things through, or find things to do with these things when we can't talk them through. And this has often been a thing for me, as like the known Buddhist in most places I live, is people have come to me and they've been like, I'm having problems with this, or like anxiety, or I'm having problems with my marriage, I'm having problems with this. What meditation should I do? And I'm like, whichever one gets you to a counselor or a therapist, because this is not what we're here for. If you want to like, if you're saying I want to meditate to try and like alleviate this suffering thing, like this general human condition, or to kind of see things how they are, that's great. And meditation can be a part of all those things I just talked about. But again, for us, I don't think it's the silver bullet that I'm going to just be like, go do Vipassana and you're fine. It doesn't work that way.
All right. So our next sort of misunderstanding, Chris, involves diet. So what's the issue there?
Ooh, this is a big one. This is going to be the debate for today. Buddhists are vegetarians or vegan, and have to be. And this is hotly debated. To be clear, textually, we do not have to be vegetarian or vegan. Where this comes up is that in the Buddha's time, monks got their food by begging. The original term for monk, bhikkhu, meant beggar. They were people who went out and begged for their food. And it would have been considered rude, or kind of an insult to the person, or almost like a harming of their karma in a way, that if they offered you food and you said, no, I won't eat that. So this came up in the Buddha's time, where other people like Devadatta and folks like that actually wanted to argue that they needed to be vegan or vegetarian. And the Buddha said no. And they continued eating meat. And it's actually debated whether the Buddha's last good meal, or the meal that killed him, was either pork or mushrooms. They can't tell based on the word that it's translated from, but it's clear that the Buddha ate meat. And yeah, however, I would argue that the Buddha didn't know about industrial agriculture and industrial meat raising, and that like environmentalism and globalism wasn't a concept that he would have had back then. And I think, like, I honestly think, I'm just going to be full on heretical here, that if you drop the Buddha in our time now and he saw everything as it was, he would probably encourage people to be vegetarian or vegan if they can. I'd like to be very clear, I am not vegetarian myself. This is a huge hypocrisy I hold. I think it should be the thing I should be doing. But for a variety of health, diet, and otherwise reasons, I don't. And I feel weird about that. But Kevin.
Well, when it comes to sort of my perception of this issue is there's nothing saying that Chris cannot become a vegetarian or vegan and be any more or less Buddhist. But when it comes to me personally, it's very similar issues. I feel like if I became a vegetarian, my weight would drop, and then my doctor would be like, why are you only 120 pounds? And then we would be having a whole lot of discussion about, you know, you should be eating this, that, and the other. Oh, you're a vegetarian? Well, go to this, that, and the other specialists to figure all things out. I like to keep my life simple. So the simple, and this is definitely a cop-out. I just like keeping my life simple. I go to the store, I buy the things that I usually buy because I know how much they are and what my budget is. And so that means I eat a lot of chicken. And do I feel like I'm a hypocrite for it? A little bit, because one of the practices is compassion. And compassion is not just, you know, being aware of other beings' dukkha, but also trying to reduce the amount of dukkha on other beings. So from a compassion standpoint, those that are vegetarian or vegan, I consider them to be way more compassionate than me, because I continue to eat the same diet I've eaten since I was like 6 years old. And so I think if you can do it, that's awesome. But if you're sort of stuck like me between, you know, like, oh, do I do it? Don't I do it? Do I really want to be 120 pounds? Do I really want to go through all this complication? It's a personal choice, honestly. And whether you're vegetarian, vegan, or none of those things, I don't think that makes us any less Buddhist if we're a practitioner.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I don't think someone being vegetarian or not being vegetarian makes them any more or less Buddhist than any other Buddhist. But yeah, I definitely encourage people to think about it, look into it, and experiment and explore with it. It's a thing that I undoubtedly will try and fail at again and again, trying to be vegetarian or ultimately vegan. Just for some perspective, like His Holiness Dalai Lama often encourages his monks and people in his community to be vegetarian and vegan. He himself tried, but actually medically has been advised not to. So he basically eats like a small, almost prescribed amount of meat for like health reasons. And I think, yeah, I think that there might be I think then instead of framing it around should we be vegetarian or vegan and blah, 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 I guess it would be, can we be non-harmful with our consumption food-wise? And if we can pull that off by consuming things in a more sustainable way, I think that might be the better question ultimately. But yeah, so this is going to be a thing that comes up at Buddhism all the time. Literally everyone assumes I'm vegan all the time, and it is technically not true that I have to be. So
All right, so the next one is Buddhism's perception on drugs. So this is I consider this a hotly debated issue too, because I know based on my readings for school and some of the outside reading, there's like a push for, you know, psychedelics because it's argued that it makes a person's experience more holistic and they can get more in touch spiritually. However, you know, as a traditional Buddhist, I'd be like, well, that's a mind-altering substance, which can negatively influence mindfulness a little bit because it you know, all those type of drugs, you know, tweak our minds a little bit, and we don't want to become dependent on them either for these purposes. So, as a traditional Buddhist, you know, like these pushes and everything are like, I'm like, I don't know. You know, we have alcohol, which is legal, but very abused. Same thing with nicotine and cigarettes. Not as much now, but you know, back when I was born and everything, it was huge. And so it's sort of like a debacle. So I once again cop out and I say, well, that's a personal choice. So if someone, say recreational marijuana becomes legalized in New York State, I'll say, okay, that's great. I won't do it. It's someone's personal choice to do it or not. I would advise them not to because of the mind-altering effects that may be in place, but it's their choice. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to be like an ultimate authority figure and say, nope, you can't do that. It's a violation of the precept. It's going to affect your mindfulness and awareness. I would just say, maybe I would take a couple of seconds to think about it because it does alter your mind. But ultimately, I leave that choice up to the person.
Yeah, and so I have met a lot of Buddhists who have had good experiences using psychoactives. And maybe I'm using that term wrong, but basically using like the cool, like you see things and experience things differently kind of drugs with meditation. And to be clear, I've met people who say that it's awesome, it's the bee's knees, blah, blah, blah. I have also met people who have had very bad experiences from that and who have kind of walked away a lot different than they went into it, and maybe not in a way that they wanted. Kind of like Kevin, I kind of take the same stance of it's up to the practitioner. However, an interesting thing I read recently on the concept of how do we navigate these sorts of things where Buddhism says X, but we think and have experienced Y, which is different than X or a variation of X. I think it's fine for us to say that we don't agree with a thing or we've come to a different conclusion and so on and so forth. It is not okay for us to say, so therefore Buddhism says this. I can say that I don't agree with a thing, but it is not my place to say that what I say is representative of Buddhism all the time. I don't know if that makes any sense, but basically we can't change the teachings. We can change how we read them, we can change how we interact with them, but it's not our place to change the teachings. And a lot of schools have a very firm, there is not a place for intoxicants in your life kind of stance. And I have various degrees of experience with intoxicants and things like that. And that in my own life is where I've also fallen and agree. So I think for me, I get really irritated when people kind of assume that as part of the general Buddhist vibe, we got to take some psilocybin mushrooms and go bliss out in a field somewhere. That's not what it's about for me.
All right. So, Chris, this term reincarnation, there are a lot of people that confuse the reincarnation process of Hinduism with that of Buddhism. So what are like the main differences there?
And I'm like the worst person to talk about this one because I barely understand this. You know where this came up for me recently is everyone was telling me to watch the show Avatar, The Last Airbender, because they're like, it's got so much Buddhism in it, you're going to be super stoked on the Buddhist representation in it, which we are historically not well or accurately represented in things. So I was really excited. I don't want to spoil anything with the show, but they then get to explaining how the whole like reincarnation of the avatar works. And basically it was this concept of like the soul, that there is the avatar self thing that is this ever continuous thing that is always there, and then that the airbender themselves is some incarnation of that. But that it is like, this is who you are and continue through all of time. That's not how it works in Buddhism at all. For us, it's kind of more of this continuation of the consciousness, but that consciousness is just one aggregate of the self that continues on. And as Ron Gilmore, our advisor, once said this really well, that the consciousness is a sticky aggregate. It kind of carries over. It's that bridge that gets us from one incarnation to the next. But it's not like the soul of Chris Accardo, will be reborn wholly as my soul in the next life. That's not how reincarnation works for us.
Yeah, and there are some traditionalists, such as myself, that don't even use the term reincarnation, use the term rebirth instead, so that there's sort of less confusion with sort of like the Hindu version of reincarnation. And so, and this is sort of like a moot point that I want to bring up, but there are different interpretations of how this whole process takes place. But the main point is that there is no soul that's going from lifetime to lifetime being carried on by ignorance and craving. It's that stream of consciousness. That's how Theravada describes it, the stream of consciousness that goes from
Right.
lifetime to lifetime. And Chris was describing to me with this concept, the bardo, in his tradition, where it's like a, I don't know, a rebirth waiting room or something like that. And I'm like, that's not necessarily counter to what Theravada might say, because maybe rebirth in the bardo is what was meant to be, and then it goes on to the next sort of stage based upon the power and the form of the karmic force that keeps that stream of consciousness going, which is fueled by ignorance and craving. I know ignorance sounds like a really harsh term, but it's just sort of what the translators put out there. And it's not like, it's like you don't know anything. It's just that you don't see things as they are from the Buddhist perspective. So and so there's like this moot point about, oh, well, the traditions can't even agree on this whole process. I don't really think that's of practical importance for a practitioner or someone who's investigating Buddhism. It's just that the process occurs. That's most important.
Yeah. Okay, so there's actually a topic when I want to throw in there. I think we glossed over it. That was buried in another topic before we jump to our last point. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
And I apologize. I don't have much to say on the reincarnation or rebirth thing. It's not a thing that takes up a lot of bandwidth in my practice, even though I actually have some thoughts or maybe like kind of experiences around it, which is like a talk for another day, maybe. But yeah, I don't think it's I don't think it's as big a part of practice as a lot of people think it is. I think it's because we view death as kind of like the final thing in a lot of Western religions, where it's like, well, the time of death is where you go to heaven, or you go to this, you go to that. I think for us, death is just a part of the practice process. It's just one stage in the whole thing. But kind of jumping around, one common misconception around Buddhism, that we don't experience negative emotions, or we don't have bad feelings, or that like we're not supposed to have those things. And the reason I bring this one up is because I was actually recently talking with a friend about this, who talked about how she felt guilt around sadness. Like when she'd like watch world events happen and she'd feel sad, she was like, I feel guilty about my sadness. And I was like, where is this coming from? And we were kind of talking about it, and how, kind of this concept that, and I might be misconstruing her thoughts or words on this, but like kind of this concept that as if we are practicing, we are cheerful and we have no negativity. And I don't think that's like the case at all. In fact, I think that is very much so toxic positivity. This kind of, and this is the thing that people in all groups are talking about now, which is good, but this concept of that we're just glossing over the bad things. Lama Rod Owen, who's a really good teacher, if you get to read or watch anything he talks about, I think said it really best. And I don't think this is unique to him, this phrase, but I think he brought it into a Buddhist application in a way I haven't seen. And this thing he said is that all emotions are data. So when we feel a negative thing, when we feel anger, when we feel sadness, when we feel something like that, it's not, oh, I need to cover that up. It's, okay, whoa. Why is this coming up right now? And sitting with that and figuring out what that, and that could point us to a point where we're like, oh, I'm being ignorant of something. But it could also point us to like, I think there's something wrong in the world, in myself, et cetera, et cetera. So Yeah, I don't think Buddhists are an angry people, and that we don't express anger by like punching drywall and yelling often, or that's not encouraged. But it doesn't mean that we just gloss over all of our feelings. And I see a lot of that in Western Buddhism, and I really, really think that we need to get away from that.
Yeah, and Chris, I gave myself a really hard time when my mother passed away when I was, let's see here, 16 years old, I believe, because I had been studying Buddhism a little bit, and I'm like, oh man, I know, impermanence and all this other stuff. Why do I feel terrible? I shouldn't feel terrible. And I was 16 years old. I had no idea what I was doing when it came to the teachings, and so I use that sort of as a learning experience for when my father passed away and said, look, you're going to feel these things. And to say, well, I shouldn't be feeling these things because I'm Buddhist is, to use the Buddha's phrase, foolish. And we're not trying to deny feelings. It's more like addressing the feelings when they come up and being like, okay, so where is this coming from? How can we reduce the influence of it? And that really helped me when it came to my father passing away. So I had that previous experience, and then I had a better understanding of, basically it's not denying that you have those feelings or saying that you shouldn't have those feelings. It's addressing those feelings when they do arise.
Yeah.
All right, so the Buddha is God or a God. All right, so I'm just going to be very straight to the point and forceful on this. There is no text that says that this is true in Theravada Buddhism. There is a text that denies that very claim and that he is anything else, because when we say the Buddha was this, that, and the other, we're assuming that the Buddha had a self, and there is no self in Buddhism, and Theravada is very clear about that. So that's it. Buddha was not a god. He denied such claims, and there's no claim in any of the texts that I have read or the commentaries.
Yeah, that's pretty much you got it there. I mean, I can't find the citation for this. Maybe I'll try and find it then. But there's all those stories of people asking, "Well, are you human?" And he goes, "No." And they say, "Are you a god?" And he says, "No." And they say, "What are you?" And he says, "I'm awakened."
Mm-hmm.
We don't know, in a way, what the Buddha was besides the Buddha, because we haven't experienced the enlightenment he talks about, or most of us haven't. But it's very clear he was very human, in a lot of ways. Physical pain, sickness. The Buddha died of dysentery. What are you gonna say?
Do you think maybe this sort of misperception comes from other traditions where they've like deified certain beings?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this hinges on our definitions and understanding of religion. So the fact that there's the comment, religion equals they have a god. Buddhism, the name Buddha is in there. Oh, Buddha must be the god. There is also the fact that I think the Buddha is deified in other like in Vedic traditions. I think they have the Buddha like as a deity figure, as an avatar, as an incarnation. Whereas we say no. But I think this is a problem why Buddhism failed to take root in some places, is he just got kind of turned into part of their pantheon.
I mean, like Avalokiteshvara, for example, is sort of like a god of compassion or whatever, and I'm like, that doesn't seem true. But I think you would know more about that than I would, because I just read the name sometimes.
So you're kind of talking like bodhisattvas and things like that. Yeah, so I think we would say that the Buddha, or that certain incarnations of people and things, they are people who have maintained their intention from incarnation to incarnation. not to go too deep into the bodhisattva thing, but so in Vajrayana Buddhism, we have the concept of bodhisattvas, who are practitioners and people who have taken vows that upon enlightenment, they won't go into parinirvana, which is the thing that comes after death and enlightenment that we don't know what it really is. So these are people who have said, no, I'm going to keep coming back and I'm going to keep staying in the cycle of rebirth and samsara to keep helping others try and learn. And I'll be honest, yeah, it borderlines on God. It borderlines on a deity. You could easily mistake it for it. That being said, they aren't creators. They aren't in control. They don't swing influence. Like, very seldom do you have stories of like, oh, and then this deity comes down and like grabs the boulder and pushes it. It's mostly like when these people show up, they're just giving talks. You know, Avalokiteshvara gives the Heart Sutra, which is like a key text on emptiness in our faith. But so, like, what does he do? He sits there with Sariputta and talks about what is emptiness, and then disappears, you know? And like a thing I've been told, and a thing I think about in my own practice, so like I've got my altar right over there, and it's got various, you know, deity forms on it. I have tattoos of these various things. When we look at those things, we aren't looking at it and being like, I pray and praise that thing. Whether it's the Buddha, whether it's the goddess there, I'm using that word, you know, Tara or Avalokiteshvara, what we're doing is we're saying that thing which you embody, I want to be that. I strive for that myself. When we bow to an image of the Buddha, we are both bowing to him and his teachings. We're bowing to the representation of the Dharma and all the things that connect us back to that time, 500 years before, you know, Christ shows up. You know, we're saying I'm connected to that, but we're also bowing to ourself in a way and saying this is what I'm reaching for. So yeah, I think maybe you could argue, if your definition of God is that like bigger, like everything's connected, man, kind of thing, like maybe the Buddha brushes up against that. But yeah, no, Kevin's right. Textually, Buddha is not a god.
Right, and you have your shrine there, and I just have a picture of a Buddha Rupa. You know, that's how traditional I am with that, because in Theravada we think of the qualities of the Buddha, not what the Buddha looked like or anything like that, because that is one of the transitory parts of ourselves. And
Right.
So it's more like, think of the qualities of the Buddha that we're trying to achieve, as opposed to a physical form that we call Buddha because it's a conventional term. But conventional and ultimate, that's a different discussion. All right, so Chris, I put down some autocomplete questions for us to answer. Now, remember, in autocomplete, we don't go into long explanations. I'll do the push-ups for that one. So we got to keep our answers short and to the point. All right. Let's see here. Why don't you start with, is Buddhism?
So these are autofills from Google, by the way, that Kevin and I punched in. Is Buddhism monotheistic? No.
I agree. Absolutely not. Next.
Is Buddhism a religion? Question mark. Yes, I'd say, but Kevin?
I say absolutely, but it depends on the individual practitioner.
Is Buddhism older than Christianity?
That's a Chris question. That's not a me question.
Definitionally, I'd say yes, because Christianity has to obviously show up with Jesus in a way. Now, if you trace Christianity back, like, and say that, like, if you include the Old Testament, then no, Buddhism is younger. But however, yeah, Buddhism shows up 500 BC roughly. So,
right.
All
right.
Christ.
So my turn. Was the Buddha ... question mark? Was the Buddha a real person? From all the evidence of archaeology, yes, the Buddha was a real person.
He also shows up in other texts by other non-Buddhists. fun fact. Like people debating the Buddha shows up and things that aren't Buddhism.
Was the Buddha a Hindu? No, Hinduism in its modern form was not formed yet. It was called Brahmanism at that time, and the caste system also wasn't like strongly established in the Buddha's time yet. So was the Buddha a Hindu? No.
I'm going to push against that one. I would argue that that is for people in the Vedic faith to decide. I would say that we would say no, but I've often wondered this myself. I don't have an answer. I don't have a good answer for this one.
Okay.
That's my.
Was the Buddha married? He was married as Siddhartha Gautama. He was married to Yasodhara, and they had a son together before he went to try and seek out awakening. So was the Buddha married? Technically, I don't know if that's a yes, but before he was awakened, he was married.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, was the Buddha, we've already basically touched on this. Was the Buddha vegetarian or vegan? And the answer to that is no. Was the Buddha Chinese? I don't think so. He was born in what? Nepal, right?
Yeah, India, Nepal. It's kind of debated on how we define it. So,
all right.
So
Chris,
that actually is the Buddha. ...
Yep.
Indian. Kind of. The region he was in northern India. That kind of is like border or in Nepal, but at the time they didn't have those designations. So.
Right. It's like think of the whole Indian subcontinent now, and that would be sort of I believe that would be a yes, if we took that definition of boundaries.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Right.
Is the Buddha a god? We already touched on this. No.
The answer is no. Can Buddhism, ? Help me or help anxiety? It depends on what you practice of it. If you practice it as a religion, or if you're just taking bits and pieces. Chris, I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say yes, it can help with those things, but it depends on how the person practices it.
Yes, I'd agree.
All right, so we're gonna address 3 things at once here. Can Buddhists eat meat, eat eggs, and have sex? I mean, that sounds like a very odd combination, but let's go for it. So yes, Buddhists can eat meat. It's their choice. They can eat eggs. That's once again as a choice, unless they want to become vegan. And can Buddhists have sex? So if you are a layperson, yes, absolutely. If you are a monk, I know in a lot of Theravada monasteries and countries, they cannot. They are supposed to abstain from it completely.
Sounds like a hell of a breakfast.
Anything to add?
Nope, I got nothing. Yeah, I mean, yeah, clearly for lay practitioners, I mean, that describes an average weekend for me. And then there are different degrees of celibate and non-celibate monastics and other denominations. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the Vinaya, which is the OG rules that the monks live by, yeah, celibacy is part of that. So
all right. Two more. These involve drugs. Can Buddhists drink alcohol, smoke weed? So once again, as a practitioner of Buddhism, I abstain from drinking alcohol because that's the main intoxicant that the precepts and the rules sort of apply to. And smoke weed, as a traditionalist, I would avoid that, even if it were legal. But once again, not everyone is me, so I leave that up to the individual person.
Yeah, I would say historically, no. In the West and modernization, yeah, it's questionable.
Can Buddhist monks marry? Not in the Theravada perspective. I have never heard of any monks marrying as they were a monk. They may have been married before they became a monk, but I've never heard of a monk taking the going forth and then saying, "Oh, I'm getting married." So I would say no for Theravada.
In Zen Buddhism, yes, there are schools that have married priesthood and monks. Vajrayana Buddhism, you have a variety. So you have celibates. You do have some who are kind of like lay, like they blur the line between lay and monastic, and they can get married. And then you do have in certain schools practices that involve a consort, which is the close. I would argue it would be like a wife or married, So complicated, but for the most part, yeah, monks can't really marry for the most part. Will Buddhism die out? Yeah, it will.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, and I would say that it's dying a very slow death right now. And it's mostly because we don't know what the Buddha really said, because it was so long ago. So it's going to die out, and who knows what form we actually have now.
Yeah, that's a whole other episode. But historically, I think and I'd have to find texts on it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a well-known concept that it's not going to be around forever. And the Buddha even talked about that, so he knew that. Will Buddhism help me? I'm going to argue that it can be helpful for everyone, no matter what degree of practice they want with it. So I'm going to say yeah.
For the most part, I would say yes as well. But it's going to be individual experience whether they perceive that it's helping them or not.
Will Buddhism disappear? That I will say no, because Buddhism as we know it might die out. But in my school, we would argue that there will be some continuation of the teachings and truths in some other form, and we might not know it as Buddhism, but it'll still be around.
So disappear as in like permanently, even in Theravada, I would argue that that's not true. We may lose the path, but in the future, it is said that there will be a future Buddha who will rediscover the path, and it probably won't be called Buddhism, but it will still be that middle way. Why is Buddhism important? Well, I can only speak for myself. Buddhism is important because it assists me with my dukkha, or my unsatisfactoriness and suffering. And it gives me a direction in which to live my life, which is something that I didn't have growing up because I wasn't brought up any particular religion. So that's why it's important to me.
Yeah, no, it's important. Obviously, I think pick a definition is important. It's a world religion, so.
Also, I might say that historically speaking, it was important because of the challenges of Indian society in which the Buddha had lived.
Right.
Whether intentional or not, we can debate that.
Right.
Why is Buddhism universally appealing and popular? Oh, boy. Well, I think the universally appealing is because we all experience some form of dukkha, and we want to address that dukkha, which is part of human existence. So I think that's why it's universally appealing, because it addresses an issue that we all experience. And I think that's also part of the popularity, as well as there's a meditation practice in Buddhism, and that's very popular. So by association, Buddhism is popular for that too.
Yeah, I think Buddhism might be one of the few religions, I would argue, that really puts all its eggs in the you have to do the work basket, which is why like you see Buddhist books in like the self-help section sometimes. Not a lot of other religions kind of deal almost exclusively with that the way we do, and I think that's why it has universal appeal. You have people of all religions practicing Buddhism,
All right, Chris, you're next.
Will meditation help me? Help depression? Long-term meditation helps folks, I think. I think it's a good thing. It's not always a good thing for everyone. It's not always a good thing for everyone at the exact time. Will it help with depression? Not necessarily. If you are feeling depressed, you should seek help.
That's where I would say use meditation as a tool, but also get other support, because depression is a big deal. It's very serious. And will meditation help people in general? It usually does. So yeah, I say yes.
Will meditation make me happy? This is a cop-out answer, and you have to define what happy means. And I think it's how we view it as a much different thing than how others might.
Oh, I don't consider that a cop-out at all, because my definition of happy is way different than what a lot of people say. So will it make you happy? I say the same thing. It depends how you define that happiness. It never makes me happy, because my definition of happiness is a long-term state. But if you think, like short-term, then it's possible.
I think meditation helps you see things how they are. What you take from that after is up to you. Will meditation help me focus? Focus is a part of meditation. A lot of meditations are concentrative. They're not contemplative. So in that way, I'd actually argue, yeah, it does. I think it helps people focus.
I agree.
Will meditation help me find myself? That's funny to think about as a Buddhist. Yes, but you might not find a lot when you look there.
I agree. But see yourself with wisdom and not foolishness, I guess.
I'll say this. I think it will help you see the parts of yourself, and you will see those things a little more clearly than you did before. And then again, what you do after that is a whole other thing.
So, Chris, I accidentally skipped one, so I got to go back to, why is Buddhism called the middle way? It's called the middle way because in the Buddha's time, and even now, there were two ways that were commonly practiced: that of self-mortification, which is hurting yourself, depriving yourself of things. And then there's the overindulgence in sense pleasures. And the Buddha found those two things to be unproductive when it comes to a spiritual path. And so it's called the middle way because it doesn't have those two extremes. That's why it's called the middle. It finds the happy medium.
I'd also argue that philosophically, even beyond the Buddha's time, we still see ourselves kind of situated as a middle way, in that we don't fall into nihilism, that nothing's real. We don't fall into eternalism, that there is this one great true self-soul that continues on. Every time something comes up, we find ourselves kind of just navigating right between them.
Okay, good point. All right, so why does meditation make me feel anxious, angry? I can speak to this. It's because there's some underlying condition that's causing those sort of reactions. And so we can use meditation to actually be mindful of those feelings and sort of look at what is sort of the cause. And then I use that as a reason to actually do contemplative meditation and be like, okay, well, what does the path say about this? And then sort of work my way through those feelings and emotions.
I would also argue, and this is a thing a lot of Buddhists talk about, it's that you're actually seeing things that were always there and already there. And it feels like the meditation brought them up, but it's just that you're paying attention maybe for the first time, or you're seeing it in a different way for the first time.
Right. All right. So why does meditation give me headaches? So this sort of reminds me of like the Zen sickness, which I don't even know how to put that into words. But for some people, when they are meditating, their mind's eye is too high or too low. And so if it's too low, commonly that will cause a stomach ache. If it's too high, it will usually cause a headache. That being said, are you in withdrawal from caffeine when you meditate or anything else? So there may be a physical explanation as opposed to a I'm in meditation type thing, which does affect you physically, but usually it's because my mind's eye is focused too high.
There is a lot of debate around the negative sides of the Buddhist path or the spiritual path, and how sometimes things that don't seem wholly positive might come up. It is a thing that is acknowledged that happens in almost all denominations, and it's a thing that people work with. So again, it's not all puppy dogs and sunshine. There's dark stuff that comes up, and sometimes physical things that can come up from it. I don't have a good answer for why. It's not a thing I have actually experienced a lot. That being said, I get migraines like all the time, so maybe I do. I don't know. But yeah, maybe, I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that one. I would say that it's a thing that you should be mindful of, and if it does happen, you should think about it and maybe get some answers.
All right, so that concludes our misunderstandings and autocomplete episode. So to be honest with you, Chris and I have no idea what we're going to do in the next episode, really. So we are going to talk about that after we end the recording. So I am Super Dharma Bro Kevin.
I'm Super Dharma Bro Chris.
And we will talk to you next time. But while you are leaving, I will sing Call Me Maybe for a little while. So so Chris is really going to enjoy this, and I'm going to hate myself for a while. All right, so I'm going to screen share, then this. Oh, I think I forgot something. Hold on. I got this. You got to do share computer sound as well. So there you go. So I'm going to sing the last like 45 seconds. All right.
Oh my God, you're doing it with music too.
Okay. So you're going to have to tell me, Chris, if you can hear.
All right. Oh, I can hear it.
Okay. This is going to be so bad. I hope I don't get sued. It's hard to look right at you, baby, but here's my number. So call me maybe. Hey, I just met you, and this is crazy, but here's my number. So call me maybe, and all the other boys try to chase you, but here's my number. So call me maybe, before you came into my life. I feel so bad, I feel so bad, I feel so bad. Before you came into my life, I feel so bad, I feel so call me maybe.
Oh my God. That's going to be my new
Bye,
ringtone.
everyone.
Oh, goodbye, everyone. Thank you for that.
Yourself seated with your backs as straight as possible, but not stiff. Don't put words on it. But if you can't help words running in your head, don't insist.